Good morning to our listeners and viewers on DBS Radio. We are currently at the Cooperative Development Division National Cooperative Industry Stakeholder Consultation, which has just begun, and you are now tuned in to a prayer by Pastor Samuel Augustine. Let's go to the podium for that.
Much excitement will be generated as the discussions go forward. We do ask, oh God, that coming out of these discussions, that there would be movement. Yes, a consultation, yes, but there'll be movement, God. Movement into implementation, movement into policies, movement into laws, and movement into the end users, oh God, being happy by what will take place here today. So we do ask, oh God, that your blessings will be upon everything that will be done and said here. We ask that your angels will encamp around about us, and in more ways than one, every idea would contend. We bless you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen, Pastor. Please be seated.
We are currently at the Cooperative Development Division National Cooperative Industry Stakeholders Consultation
of the International
Here
Labour
we'll be
Organization,
from several people right
heads
now.
of division,
We are
and other senior
introduction
officials
and
of the various line
the
ministries,
Secretary in the
executives
Sports,
of the Dominican Employers Federation, and the Dominican Association of Industry and Commerce.
Consultation is bringing
Pastor
together all of the
Samuel Augustine,
stakeholders under the Cooperative Development Division,
a consulting firm headed by Dr. Henry of the Cipriani Labour College of Trinidad and Tobago, chairpersons and members of the board of directors of the corporate industry, managers and executives of the various cooperative entities, members and shareholders of the cooperative industry, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, very gracious good morning to you. And you have been very gracious indeed for your patience. It is a considered privilege and pleasure to express
who will benefit from this policy making consultation.
On behalf of the Ministry of Culture, Youth, Sport and Community Development, which is the parental ministry responsible for cooperative industry in Dominica, and to wish you a very productive, respectful, professional, and of course, impactful session today. Your attendance and participation in this consultative stage of the policy development framework for Dominica is no coincidence, and nor should it be treated lightly. I urge you first to listen very attentively and be observant to the presentations and suggestions by the consultants, and secondly, to be seriously engaging and to be very interactive during the discussions and sharing segments. Such a proactive response is most significant, and you may ask me, why do I say so? And so, since it is meant to be an interactive session, I may ask you if you may wish to inform us accordingly. Do anybody know, or any one of you need to share with us why we should be very engaging and interactive today? It's not a right or wrong question, it's just a sharing. Anyway, since we have no volunteer, I will gladly give you my perspective. And my reason for saying so, because I want to fervently believe that policy has to be relevant. And I really seriously underscore the word relevance. And why do you think that the policy should be relevant, Mr. Sebastian? Why do you think policy should be relevant? Okay, I think policy should be relevant, and I say I think, because I cannot speak for you. Policy, first of all, has to be effective. And could you be effective and not being relevant? Dr. Henry? I will say a big no to that. And for you to be effective, you have to basically know what you should be doing. So doing the right thing is being effective. And I'm a serious believer of that. Because we're here, we're thinking or developing policy for cooperative because we want to revamp the cooperative industry. And to do that, we want to be productive, or we want to ensure productivity is our number one agenda. And going forward for you, productivity is two simple factors, or two factors in an equation. One is efficiency, and the next one is effectiveness. So effectiveness compared with efficiency would give you productivity. So you may have a classic situation if you do not ensure that your policy is relevant. You may have systems and processes that are very efficient, but yet still ineffective. If you're thinking of doing an exam and you get half right is like half wrong, you know. It's not right. So you're just about 50%. So both part of the equation is very important. So your part today is ensuring that the right things are being done. So you could well understand and appreciate the significance of your participation today. Is ensuring that at the end of the day, whatever is endorsed, I would say on the back end of the ministry, would be something that was bought in, something that you owned, and we may say so at the grassroots level, or we may say a bottom-up approach to things. So it's all meant to be a very inclusive process. And for the process to be inclusive, it means, therefore, we have to have very active interaction. So your presence today should be no way underestimated nor neglected. So I say those things so that you can be reminded why you're here today. And I think the slide stops that we had earlier on, it might be an indication of your endurance, your tenacity, and your patience. Because all those are prerequisites in the whole scheme of things if you want to be successful in any undertaking. So going forward, I really want to urge you to take this consultative process very seriously. It is you making your contribution to what the policy framework should be for Dominica. Where is it we want to see the industry going? So at the end of the day, we can put in all the necessary prerequisites and supporting mechanisms for ensuring the process is very rewarded at the end of the day. Going forward as well, I really want to ensure that we look at the cooperative industry as a very significant player in the productive sector in Dominica. And it shouldn't be left for the imagination. It's something that I think I can go even boldly and say that the cooperative industry is endemic to our fusion of things in Dominica. And I say so because the cooperative industry, we all will admit, is a cultural aspect of our social upbringing, our social development. And why do I say so? All of us here, maybe the head table, might be excused because I know certain parts in Trinidad, Maraval, they still speak Creole, but I'm not sure where Dr. Henry is from. But we all here can brag and boast about the Kudme spirit. And the Kudme spirit, again, shouldn't be taken lightly nor in isolation. We are here not because we need or we want a policy. We are here because we realize to go forward, we need to have a policy. Because policy is the number one building block in any rewarding or more so commercial enterprise you want to undertake. So we are mindful of the fact that we know the rewards that we can get from coming as a collective together. And we should also realize that we're going forward with the cooperative development as part of a pioneer and part of a priority development focus for government. So it's not something we're going to start from scratch, nor is it something that we have to do by reinventing the wheel, but it's something nonetheless we have to do by added value to the foundation we have already. Now I'll tell you how significant is the cooperative industry, because we have been hearing for a while since after Hurricane Maria that in order to build back better, we have to become the first climate resilient country of the world by 2030. Now, a lot of us hear this expression and we do not understand the germane and the genesis behind that goal. By we saying we're going to be the first climate resilient country in the world, it means that Dominica will be able to show in a very fundamental way in the global stage that we are the first country that have attained desired sustainable development. And the prerequisite for ensuring that you have attained this level of global status is by ensuring that you have attained the 5 Ps. And the 5 Ps footprints are clearly and boldly stated on the sand by the synergies of the cooperative industry. And I'll tell you so. The 5 Ps, number 1 is people. Number 2 is partnership. Number 3 is prosperity. And if you want me to go to the next, I can tell you planet and I can tell you peace. But just telling you the first 3, you all can join that together with what you're doing. So you first see that you're interested in social capital by coming together as a collective. We say and we're reminded there's strength in numbers. So by all of us putting our little bit together, we have what you call, Mr. Robin will tell us in the financial term, we call economies of scale. We first realized economies of scale by looking at the human capital or the labor component of things. And it's by no coincidence we have the International Labor Organization with us, and of course the consultant with Superior Labor College. Not too long ago, we left school, some of us left school for a long time ago, but we know the first thinking of economics talked about the factors of production. Number 1 is labor. Number 2, they tell you plant, machinery, and they also tell you a bit of equipment. So labor is fundamental. So we realize by we talking about the cooperative industry, it is predicated very strongly on the social aspect of things, as well as the economic aspect of things. And we can, if we tie that and we dovetail that to the ideals of we being the first climate resilient country in the world, it is driven by 3 key pillars. 1 is a social pillar, number 2 is an economic pillar, and number 3 is the environmental pillar. So by you partaking in the cooperative industry, you're already leveraging on 2 fronts, which is the social and economic aspect of things. So in the new scheme of things, you're realizing we have to rethink and we have to re-strategize. Because it can't be business as usual. And I like to tell the people in the cooperative division, it can't be the same old, same old. We can't be about that. It's about advance. It's about embracing new technology. It's about looking at smart partnerships. And we have the capabilities of doing it because we don't have to look outside of the room. Right within the room, we have the practitioners for the cooperative credit unions. We can say which is a world-class entity. But while it's a world-class entity, we could not remain in what we refer to as complacency. Because to be complacent in anything that you do is almost signing your death warrant. Because you're in a very dynamic industry, things will change. In fact, the only inevitable is change. So we have to understand, we have to rethink, and we have to re-strategize. If we have to rethink and if we have to re-strategize, it has to start from first principle. It has to start with the policy. The policy what will drive your strategic plans, your development plans, your marketing plan, and all the other big plans and aspirations you'll have. Everything has to come from your policy. So you see why it is very important that you're here today to ensure you challenge, and I say so very boldly, you challenge the consultant. You're not here to take everything as gospel, because you know why? At the end of the day, I remember faces, I might remember names, and I make sure I took a good look around the table this morning, even the posse watching me and thinking I can't remember him. I remember everybody in front here. So you would have no excuse, because you had a choice, you had a chance to partake, to ensure we get it right the very first time. And to get it right the very first time, we have to be proactive, we have to be participatory, we have to be involved, we have to be engaging, and to ensure at the end of the day we ask the right questions at the right time to ensure when we get this endorsed policy, it is really formulated for the betterment of all of us. So we're happy to have a very broad representation this morning, and that is the dynamics of the cooperative movement. We have very humble, modest entities, and we also have super giants. But while we have super giants, as I say, we cannot be in the situation where we go beating our chest, because we have to ensure that the enabling environment is always sustained and is in the right mood, the right readiness to ensure enhancement and continuous development and progress is realized. So I'm very happy to see such large outpouring here this morning. And on this note, I really want to say a very hearty welcome to all of you. I wish you a very engaging again session, and to ensure at the end of the day, when the consultant leave here, they will be very satisfied with the level of contribution, interaction, and sharing that will come out from today's consultation. I also want to take this opportunity to express a very special welcome as well to the consultant, to Dominica. They are Caribbean neighbors. They all come from Trinidad, and we're happy to have them as members of our Caribbean Brotherhood and Fraternity. So to Dr. Henry, we tell you a very special welcome to Dominica, and I know you have been graced with some of the good tidings that we have to offer in Dominica. We boast to be one of the most pleasant, fun-loving, and receptive people within the Caribbean. And I think before you leave, you might be able to share with us whether you find we were as hospitable as we should be for your last 2 days here. So on that note, I say it's for me an honor to be here. And I also want to extend, on behalf of the ministry, the excuse for the presence of the minister this morning. We are a ministry that strives on being people-oriented. We are having the local government month, and we're having the heritage celebration this morning in no other constituency but the Granford constituency. So there's no way the minister could have gotten out of this one this morning. So she has, however, asked that I send her cordial wishes to everyone and to wish you a very productive and insightful session here today. So on this note, I call on Dr. Henry to lead us off in the presentation. Dr. Henry.
Good morning. Could someone assist us by turning on the projector, please? I see. No. While we get that sorted, just want to say how very pleased my team and I are happy to be with you in Dominica. As a Trinidadian, Dominica is my second favorite place in the world. I've been coming here for the last 22 years, First, as a member of staff of the International Labour Organization, only to find that I have family here, and then I've been back frequently, and so I'm very pleased to be representing the Cipriani College of Labour and Cooperative Studies, as we have been engaged by the ILO to do this very important piece of work. And it was on when we came. Yes. I was just making sure that they... Well, I know the work that we did, so so we will proceed. Put it up here for me, follow, if it would fit. Yes, yes. Well, it's less for my purposes and more for the purposes of So let me introduce you to the members of my team. With me in the room, Mr. Colin Bartholomew. Colin is our Dean for Cooperative Studies and an expert in cooperative development, at least 2 levels of certification from the ILO on cooperative development. Also with me in the room is Mr. Marlon Caesar. Marlon is the president of the UWI Credit Union, easily one of the most progressive credit unions in Trinidad and Tobago. And joining us online is Mr. Sheldon Salino, who serves as my deputy at the Cipriani College. So, what I propose to share with you this morning is the result of our work over the last, is the result of our work over the last 3 months. And my presentation has 5 parts. The first is that I want to share with you, and PS talked about policy, and I want to share with you what a policy is supposed to do. I think it's important for us to demystify, because there is no big secret about what a policy is supposed to do. I also want to, as soon as Colin stops sabotaging me, I also want to share with you that for the purposes of Dominica, what we see as the drivers of the policy. PS talked about our policy being relevant. So in order for us to ensure that policy is relevant, we have to understand in your particular situation what is driving the policy. And then once we get that in our minds, we need to understand where is the Dominica cooperative movement at this time, and then we will go into what are the policy priorities, and we will then take it from there. So what are the characteristics of a good policy? For me, the characteristics of a good policy are very simple. It should define what are the roles, well, first, what are the expectations of the stakeholders involved who the policy affects. So the first thing the policy has to do is to tell, is to define for you or to make clear what are your expectations. You know, sometimes we have expectations, but they are in the back of our head. It's what we call tacit knowledge. So what the policy seeks to do is, especially where you have a broad-based movement like the cooperative movement, is for us as stakeholders in that movement to understand what is our common consensus. What is our consensus about what we can expect for the movement? And having what we can expect, we then need to define what are the roles of the various stakeholders in the movement. So we have to understand what is the role of the ministry, what is the role of the registrar, what is the role of the FSU, what is the role of individual cooperatives, what is the role of the officers of the individual cooperatives, and what are the competencies required in those various roles, and if those competencies are not there, what do we do to make sure that those competencies are there? The next thing a policy is supposed to do, it is supposed to be flexible, especially in a very dynamic relation, in a very dynamic environment. John, just 2 weeks ago, your colleague Tom reminded us of a quotation from Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, GE. And Jack Welch said, if the rate of change, if the external rate of change is greater than the internal rate of change, the end is near. So if the environment within which we are operating in is changing rapidly, but we are not changing, we would soon find ourselves being irrelevant and unable to deal with the reality that we have. So a policy must be flexible in order to be fit for purpose in a very dynamic environment. A policy must also be appropriate for the operating environment. Dominica is a very unique country, and one of the things my colleagues and I never do is to take a lesson from somewhere else and try to fit it into where we are. So while we understand the changing external environment, it is necessary for us, if we're going to develop good policy, to ensure that that policy is able to speak to the domestic environment, to the actual operating environment. In other words, what are the needs and aspirations of Dominicans? And finally, very important, a policy must be clear and easy to understand by all of those whom it affects. So we have large credit unions, we have small credit unions. We have well-established non-financial cooperatives. We have fledgling non-financial cooperatives. But it's one policy. And each cooperative, non-financial or financial, big or small, old or new, needs to be able to understand what are its rights and obligations under the policy. So we are very determined to ensure that whatever policy we recommend to you, that that policy is as simple as possible and as easy to understand. So the purpose of policy, as I said, is for us to establish some clear and concise guidelines and rules that define expectations and boundaries, as well as to establish a framework for decision-making and actions that are consistent with the philosophy or specific objectives that we have defined. For us, when we looked at the Dominican situation, what did we see as the drivers of your policy? The first thing, it's all right, we're good here. The first thing is, what are the developmental challenges faced by the Commonwealth of Dominica? For us, policies have to be adding value. And what we need to do, especially for cooperatives, which are focused on people we have to determine what are the development challenges Dominica faces and how can the cooperative movement add value to the solving of those development challenges, and therefore, what does the policy do to ensure that the cooperative movement can add its full potential to solving the challenges. So in other words, we need to find out what is the problem that cooperatives are trying to solve. Secondly, since it's a developmental challenge, economic and social development, we need to understand what is the government's overall or overarching policy framework to address these challenges, because we want to ensure that the policy we propose is at least, the policy we propose, I hope you are understanding what I'm saying, because my watch isn't understanding. Yes, yes. That the policy we propose is consistent with the overarching national development policy. And as you know, the overarching national development policy for Dominica is your national resilience development strategy, which has as its primary objective, its overarching objective, the climate resilience country. The third is the culture and aspirations of the country. And the fourth are the opportunities for growth, innovation, and development. So we have these like 4 moving parts: the development challenges, government policy, your own aspirations as a people, and the opportunities that you can take advantage of using the cooperative movement. And underlying that for us, presenting us with a sector-specific set of guidelines or parameters, we have the ILO recommendation 193, as well as the 7 cooperative principles as articulated by the International Cooperative Alliance. By the way, you can stop me at any time and ask me any question. It will also give me a chance to rest my voice. So the role of the policy that we are recommending is that we are seeking to define the role of cooperatives the objectives. We are seeking to define the role of cooperatives in the social, economic, and cultural development of its members, their communities, and the Commonwealth of Dominica. And I want you to see that ascending, you can't cascade up, right? You have to cascade down. Yeah. But I want you to see that ascending process. We start with, the cooperatives have to add value to the individual so that the individual recognizes the importance of his or her engagement. And as it adds value to the individual, and as individuals come together, it adds value to an immediate community. And as it adds value to an immediate community, it adds value to the country. So there is a direct line of sight in the cooperative movement from the individual to the development of the country. The second, yes, sir. Okay, so what we've done, our remit was to make recommendations of a policy. But I have a friend who likes to tell me, a text without context is a con. No, sir, a con. A text without context is a con. And I don't think that you will be in a position to effectively critique our recommendations unless you understand how those recommendations were arrived at. So I thank you for your question, because what it does is that you need to test my logic. You need to tell me whether in attempting to develop this policy, there are issues that we didn't consider. So we considered your development strategy, we considered your development objectives, we considered the state of the cooperative movement. You need to tell me you haven't considered these other factors that would inform the policy. But we are getting to the policy. But my colleague, when you're an old man, you tend to talk a lot. And my colleagues always tell me that. So bear with me, okay? And don't subject me to any elder abuse, okay? So the second thing we want to do is to present, to create a supportive environment, that the policy must put in place an environment that allows cooperatives to bloom. And then we want to identify what is the role of the key actors. What is the role, I said, of the registrar, of the various actors in the movement. But as we think about cooperatives, I want us to look at the significance of the cooperative movement in Dominica. The assets in credit unions in Dominica are $346 million US dollars. The deposits in credit unions are 292.
The question or comment made a while ago, I think, was very fitting, because we're here looking at the formulation, development of the policy. So what is being done right now is giving you the framework. All right? The framework will take into consideration, of course, that is the second line of consultation. They would have done an initial consultation already. We're able to gather some information, put some sort of skeleton to the whole process, and then being able to make some suggestions. So what is being done right now is giving you some of the findings, enveloped quite nicely in the framework, and then from that you'll be able to get a better understanding and appreciation as to where we are now and where is it we really want to go. So the point made by the gentleman here is the institute leader in the Employers Federation. So he's a businessman. You understand the context. So that is what it is. So it's giving you, first of all, an understanding of the framework, and as you rightly said, trying to get the context into the whole thing, give you a wider appreciation as to where we are, where we want to go, some of the fundamental ways and means of thinking of going there. And as I said earlier on, you have to be an integral part of the process. So you're here to agree to some of the thinking. You're here to also add your perspective to some of the thinking. You're also here to put some of your dynamism and even some of your like a twist and turn to the whole thinking. So it's an iterative process. So what it's doing now is just setting the foundation for further discussion and dialogue. Did I clarify that any better, Mr. Archer? And that is good. So we are here to exchange. And Dr. Henry has a lot of experience. I know he does better when he's dynamic. He's a little restrained this morning, so please feel free. You can be really put you out from any angle. If you want to leave the podium, you can walk through the crowd and get it. But we're here to give the interaction as it comes along. So the only ideas that are bad are those don't mention. So take a straw from Mr. Arshil, and when some of the thinking is there, just raise your hand and give your point.
By the way, I want to make clear, I am never offended by questions. I have a fundamental principle that the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So I don't know why PS thought he needed to defend me, you know. But I guess it's the kindness of the Dominican spirit. Well, I like to tell people I am a veteran of foreign wars. But the only reason I am feathered, the only reason I'm feathered to the podium is that I think these mics need to hear me. So I can't move. But my preference would have been to be able to work the room. But the point I was making, yes, ma'am. All right, I'm about to tell you the data. Yeah, no, I'm going to give you the data. You see, PS interrupt me in my flow. Eh? But it's my brother, so he will get away with it. All right, so the point I am making is that, and these are figures produced by the World Bank, and they are 2021, I think, figures, yeah, 2021. But the assets of the credit union movement in Dominica are 346 million US dollars. Deposits in credit unions are 292 million, and loans are 206 million. And the most important contextual figure here is that the total GDP of Dominica is 552 million US dollars. In other words, the assets of the credit union movement in Dominica exceed 3/5 of the total GDP of the country. I have shared that when I saw these figures, it inspired me, but it also made me very nervous. Because as they say in the United States, the credit union movement in Dominica is too big to fail. In other words, while there are all of these opportunities of the movement to contribute to development, if we don't do it right and the movement fails, it could be devastating to the economy of Dominica, worse than CLICO and BICO. And because you are part of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, it could be devastating to the rest of the OECS. So I want us to understand the significance of what we are doing. The world average for the penetration of cooperatives, of non-financial cooperatives, financial cooperatives, is 12.1%, 12.18%. For Dominica, it's 169%. So there are two takeaways here. The first is the risk of not doing this well, and the second is the demonstration of how the movement has penetrated deeply into the cultural psyche of Dominica. Cooperatives are part of who you are, and that's one of the points that PS made. And I think those are important things for us that need to resonate with us. One of the things we did is that we did an assessment of this behemoth that you have. And we did a strengths opportunity, a SWOT analysis. And these are some of the things we came up to. I'll just let you read them yourself rather than go through them. But what our team found is that by the way, we are going to share our presentation with you, because this is not any state secret. I think if you're going to be buying into what we do, it is important that you have all the information that you need. Yes. So we've recognized these are some of the strengths: its penetration, the public perception of the movement, the fact that you have a penetration rate of 169% means that the public recognizes that this is something that is important. And not just in financial cooperatives, but the Cooperative Development Division has a map of Dominica, and they have plotted where cooperatives exist. And in virtually every community in Dominica, there is a cooperative, either financial or non-financial, sometimes more than one. So the reach of this movement, this sector, this industry, is both wide and deep. One of the big strengths that we found, and this goes back to the relationship with national strategy, is that the movement is closely related to the blue and green economy. fishing. A lot of the non-financial credit cooperatives are engaged in fishing or agriculture. Okay. But we found that there are some weaknesses. While you have quite a few strengths, and in a sense, the strengths outweigh the weaknesses, we found that there are some weaknesses. And I want to spend more time on the weaknesses than the strengths, because the policy is seeking, while it is seeking to leverage strengths, we're seeking to address weaknesses. We find that there is inadequate interagency cooperation. We find that even among some of the leadership in the movement, there is an insufficient familiarity with the legislation and the regulations. In other words, what are your responsibilities? What are your rights? We think that for an industry that is as important as this, there isn't sufficient advocacy, structured and strong advocacy. We are concerned especially among that there is an aging leadership in the movement. When we look at the representation on boards, etc., we believe that there is a greater, that there's a need for more, I don't want to say inclusive, but more representative leadership, particularly with young people and women. We find that the NFCs, the non-financial cooperatives, are undercapitalized. There are some significant capacity gaps among the cooperative leadership, and there is a weak brand. For something as important as this, we were disappointed that the brand itself is not as strong as it should be. Yes? Don't forget I'm giving you the presentation, you don't have to write if you, okay. Yeah, that's it. So, what are some of the opportunities? Oh, sorry, John, yes, go ahead. Both. Because the brand, while you could have a strong national brand, remember cooperatives are founded in communities, often founded in communities. The individual cooperatives also need to have their brand strengthened. So what are the opportunities that we believe the policy should seek to support? One is the penetration into the evolving sectors, the development of infrastructure to support cooperative collaboration through shared services, a role for marginal groups, marginalized groups to assist in strengthening and building the sector. And there are rapid advances and decline in costs of technology which can be used, which can be leveraged to strengthen the movement. Some of the threats that we found for the movement is the inadequate and outdated legal, regulatory, and policy framework, which is what we are trying to address here. The potential for political interference in institutional governance, the loss of the credit of the cooperative ethos, especially, in financial cooperatives, in credit unions, especially as credit unions now fall under the FSU. And while we understand the need because of the significance of the sector and its complexity, while we understand the need for credit unions to be subject to a high level of scrutiny, we believe that if the guidelines are purely financial or overwhelmingly financial, and there is insufficient attention to the cooperative principles, even in credit unions, that credit unions will not be able to realize their full potential. And I think one of the threats we see too is the absence of a clear regional strategy. And this is especially important, as I said earlier, because Dominica is part of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. So what are the policy drivers? What we did to identify what we call the policy drivers is that we looked at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we said, what are the policy initiatives that we can identify that would allow us to use our strengths in order to maximize the opportunities that are being presented. So we call those our strength opportunity drivers. And then we also said, what are the policy strategies we can use, where we can use our strengths to minimize the impact of the threats that we face. Those are our strength threats drivers. Then we said, what are the policy that we can do where we can take advantage of the opportunities that are being presented to minimize our weaknesses. We call those our weakness opportunity drivers. And then finally, we looked at our weaknesses and our threats, and we said, what policies do we need to have, or aspects of policies we need to have that would allow us to minimize the conflation of when the threats come together with weaknesses. So, what are some of the strength opportunity drivers that we found? General, we said we need to have policies, a policy environment that would allow for the mobilizing of resources for investment in the blue and green economies. We need to provide regulations and incentives to mobilize community assets for the development of the blue and green economy, including value addition. For credit unions, we need to be suggesting that there is room to develop mechanisms to allow Dominican diaspora to make remittances to credit unions. And for non-financial credit cooperatives, we want to be suggesting we could create a revolving fund to support the development of the sector. Now, these are kind of like the high-level policy drivers. And for each of these, what we will do will be to drill down for more specificity. Any comments on these? No comments? Okay. My brother, I hope you're not dissuaded from asking questions. Eh? Okay, please. Yes. Weaknesses and with the weakness opportunity drivers. Remember, we identify a range of weaknesses. What are some of the ways we can use opportunities to address those weaknesses? So we could use technology to create a system to share good practice and other knowledge products among cooperatives. So while we know that there are some small cooperatives that may not have the resources to do everything that they want to do, but with the opportunities in technology, we can create what you call knowledge products, where smaller cooperatives can access those knowledge products and be able to develop their own capacity. We can use technology to attract younger persons to the movement. We can use technology to empower women in the movement. For credit unions, we suggest that there is room to leverage technology to build the capacity of leaders and members in the movement. For NFCs, that is the non-financials, we're suggesting that you could use ICT. Yeah, suggesting that we could use ICT to integrate the cooperative sector, that we can connect NFCs to opportunities to access technical and financial assistance, the possibilities for networking with national, regional entities, that we can have model cooperatives that can be emulated, and that we can have greater interagency, a more effective interagency governmental network. Thanks. So the weakness, I think it's gone. Go back, Anita. Yeah, we missed the weakness threads. Weakness threats is the next one. So remember we said we have weaknesses and we have threats. We need policy that would ensure that when those two combine, they don't devastate us. This is my friend, eh? He also works for me. So if you hear he get in trouble, you understand why. Yeah, Colo. I will deal with it, so. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah. So the weakness threats, where we want to deal, we want to ensure that the combination of our weaknesses and threats, when they come together, that they don't devastate us. So we want to ensure that we have a robust regulatory and technology-driven sector. We want to implement a social quality audits framework, because Dominica is about developing communities, and we recognize that there are some challenges in terms of losing the cooperative ethos. So we want to have in our sector social audits that will tell us whether the cooperative movement is having the social impact it needs to have. For credit unions, we want to excuse me. We want to understand what are the policy initiatives you can do that would facilitate greater innovation of products for diversification. And we want to see what are the policy initiatives that will support increased marketing and delivery of business loans, for example, where the movement contributes more to the productive sector rather than focusing only or mainly on consumption. For NFCs, what are the policy initiatives that we suggest here? We recognize that there's a need to strengthen the legislation governing NFCs, that we need to strengthen the institutional and human capacity of the regulatory agency, that we need to develop an indigenous prudential standards for NFCs. In other words, part of the focus here is to get non-financial cooperatives operating more like businesses, more like strong, robust businesses. And we are asking ourselves, what are the policy initiatives that need to be done to support non-financial cooperatives to operate as more effective businesses? The threat drivers, so we said there are threats out there in the environment. How can we use our strengths to depend on them to minimize those threats? So we want to develop the Dominica cooperative brand, which draws on its strengths, can address issues that threaten the movement. Also, that there's a need to get greater government support for NFCs and enterprising individuals. So government has programs of support. What is the role of credit unions as intermediaries in funding that the support to end users? Could there be a greater role for credit unions and the movement as a whole in ensuring that social and economic development programs, given the fact that these institutions have such deep and wide reach? For credit unions, we believe that there is room for adjusting regulatory systems to ensure robustness of the cooperative ethos. So the recommendation, and we had an initial discussion with John, the recommendation is not that the FSU does not regulate credit unions, but we need to ensure, or we need to find a model that works for Dominica, given the Dominican environment, that would ensure that even as the credit union movement goes from strength to strength, that the cooperative ethos is not lost. For NFCs, we believe that there should be a policy initiative for establishing cooperative operated products and services, an entity that would market cooperative services in order that would reduce the risks to them. So, what we've identified then are 8 policy imperatives. And this is what you've been waiting for. First, policy imperative 1.0, improving the legal and regulatory framework. Policy imperative 2.0, improving services to credit unions. 3.0, expanding the cooperative business model and its impact. 4, improving the capacity of cooperative leadership and members. 5, incentivizing innovation and growth. 6, developing entrepreneurship and new business. 7, facilitating the participation of women and youth. And 8, increasing brand recognition. We believe it is possible to identify a work program of policy initiatives and related strategies and activities that could address these issues, and we believe that this would put the cooperative movement in a far better position to build on its very strong history, but be able to do so robustly in the rapidly changing environment. Any comments at this slide? This is possibly the most important slide that we need you to give us feedback on. So I would leave it up for a while, have you look at it. I think what we have here is a well-rounded policy environment that allows us to maximize our strengths, take advantage of the opportunities that we see, manage our weaknesses, and mitigate against the threats that we face. Next step, if we get validation of those priorities I identified, what we need to do is to develop an action plan. And the action plan would have the priority areas, and really build it out in a logical chain that will see us move from the impact we want the movement to have to the details in terms of all the things that we must do to make it happen and the kinds of human and other resources that we have to invest in the movement. And very important in this whole process will be a system that includes monitoring and evaluation to make sure that you are on the right road and that you would have arrived, that when you get there, you would know that you're getting there. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much, and I pause in the event that you have any questions you wish to ask. Yes, ma'am. Yes? Because that has the most specific information. No, we don't. That information, the source that we got this from in our research, didn't disaggregate the information. But that information is important. But what we did, you have writing. Should I pull out the plug now that he's going to speak?
All right, thanks. So, no, in terms of the loan, in terms of the loans, right? The source is from the World Council of Credit Unions. So basically, it's aggregate data. So the deposits actually represents the shares and savings, while the loans is also an amalgamation of the entire loan portfolio. However, and this is being very guarded, we have observed that a sizable portion of the loan portfolio in Dominica resides in mortgage loans. Yeah, I mean, definitely. And that's why we actually went one of the threats, all right, is where the loans reside. Sorry, it's a weakness. All right, in terms of the types of loans. that are being offered. And as you say, it's loan quality that matters. So if you look at the driver, one of the weakest drivers you would see in terms of increased marketing and innovation for the loan products to become a higher quality loan. With the portfolio residing in things like mortgages and low quality loans, it really puts that particular sector at risk, especially the credit unions. So it creates a greater risk when it comes to a portion of the loan portfolio really being over subscribed. So we fully agree with the recommendation.
I'd just like to point out that one of that question has a very important implication in terms of the management of the sector. We should not have had to rely on an external source to tell us what the contribution and organization of the sector is to Dominica. That information, including the kinds of disaggregation we're talking about, should be readily available, because if this sector is as important as it is, and we agree with it, that information is supposed to be, the sector is supposed to be monitored more closely, and that information is supposed to be readily available so we can understand and manage the risk that I hope Colin and I haven't stepped into an ant nest. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Just 1 minute. I think it is important for us to identify ourselves so that for the records we can also take. So maybe we could go back to the lady over there.
Okay, good morning. Good
We go
morning,
back to her
everyone
anyway.
from
But just say who you
NCCU.
are.
Ms. Nigel George from NCCU. And Dr. Henry stated that the information compiled in the report was not readily available. However, the credit unions reports to financial services units quarterly information of that nature, our size, our loans portfolio. So every quarter, every 3 months we report that. So that was an avenue that could have been.
Okay. Thank you for the information, yes. You need to get access to that. Yeah, we asked for it. I just let you know that we asked for the information. Just for the record. Any further questions? Yes, John. You mind not causing Colin and me to get in more trouble than we already got into? There are arguments for and against consolidation, and I think each case needs to be examined on its own merit. John, I just went back 30 years to my career in diplomacy. Any further questions? Yes, ma'am. Could we, the mic, please? Yes.
Glenda Smith Barron, at the concentration risk where the loans portfolio is concerned, and whether the document, the policy that you are formulating will address why that is so and just what we can do to mitigate that risk.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, and it's an omission that we apologize for, because it was certainly something that we discussed among ourselves as a weakness in the movement as a whole, and how we have sought. Well, one of the strategies in policy, or one of the policy initiatives that we propose to try to deal with that, and we'll be open to other suggestions now, would be to create the incentives that would allow or encourage the movement to give, for example, loans to support the development of the productive sector as opposed primarily to consumption. Another question, a hand in the back.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon. My name is Reginald Robin, General Manager of Margaret Credit Union. To my mind, all loans are risk from day one, but it depends on the policies you put in place to govern those loans. One of the most frustrating situations we have in the country is the laws that govern certain aspects of our loan portfolio. For example, the court system is a very frustrating system when you try to recover the proceeds from your loan. For example, if you try now to sell a house or a vehicle or some assets for a member, it takes you so long through the court system to recover the proceeds that by the end of the day you are frustrated. So I hope these are one of the areas that your consultancy is addressing. Okay? Because, for example, if you give a loan for a house, be it a commercial building or a dwelling house, and the customer is unable to meet the obligation, you take that matter to court. By the time you finish the process, it takes years. At that time, the asset depreciates, and you are not able to recover the full value of what you give out. My mind, the bottom line of any loan is the security of the loan, the ability of the person to repay the loan, and the willingness of the person to repay the loan. Okay? So anything out of that, when you structure your portfolio, anything out of that, then you're not doing your members justice.
Yes, thank you. And in terms of that comment, if you look at the threats, it is one of the areas identified in terms of the adequacy of the legal and regulatory framework to strengthen it, as well as taking into consideration, in addition to those factors that you touched on, also looking at the risk elements. So moving the sector through policy to more risk-based supervision. And of course, credit unions also relying on that infrastructure.
Thanks, Colin. Very good feedback. I expected that much. Of course, I would expect you to have a lot of thought-provoking ideas going through your mind right now, because when you see a risk, you have to really take it very seriously. I take the point of recovery that Mr. Robin was making a while ago, but that's just one aspect of the whole thing. I think what that has showed us in terms of the situation analysis of the current kind capitalization and funding and assets of the credit unions, is there is a piece of the pie in terms of the division of labor for the work to be done for driving policy at the board level and at the national level. And I'm saying that when you look at the mixture of the loan portfolio, it begs of you to ensure you differentiate the loan portfolio. It may not always be an issue, Mr. Robin, of a question of recovering of the costs. You may have the asset, yes, you repossess, but at the end of the day, you might also find yourself in a situation where you're starved for working capital. So the other thing we have to look at, yes, housing loan is important. I mean, it's shelter. But at the end of the day, you at the board level, you must be cognizant of the fact of the mix of your loans. We know, well, they're doing the work for us, so we have to take them in. We know the situation. Sometimes a lot of these mortgage loans can be afforded because you have husband and wife working. We need to ask ourselves seriously, what if one of them is out of employment? What is the repercussion in terms of payback? And it mightn't be necessarily the situation you want to repossess. As I rightly said, you want to ensure you have a revolving fund because it's from on-lending that you're able to make the capital work. So I say, and this is not a situation of being right or wrong, and hence, as I said, this is the need why we have to rethink and re-strategize. We have made a quantum leap in the credit union movement that have become the enviable piece for most of us within the region and out of the region. But at the same time, as I was saying earlier on in my remark, we mustn't take that for complacency or mustn't be complacent about that. When we look at these things, we should be able to ask ourselves, should we be ensuring that at the board level, at the executive level, we have predetermined ratios or percentages as to what should go into building, what should go into other productive means, because the productive loans, when I say productive, I mean those going into the productive sector, is very important, because it's from the productive means you're ensuring that you're driving an entrepreneurial base, and it's through the entrepreneurial base you're ensuring that you have rejuvenation and further growth and expansion in your return and the size of your entity. So those are very important and very instructive take for you. So I know it's going to be quite a bit. What I would suggest, those are just sort of things to stimulate your thought process. While the thoughts are still very active and in a very active state in your mind, make the notes, and you can also, if you do not ask the question or make the contribution here, ensure that you escalate them to the cooperative division or to the ministry so they find themselves into the document. It's not necessarily that you'll have all the questions right now, because those are very serious questions that we have to ask ourselves. And those are things, like I said, not only for the policy at what we're doing there at the national level, but then have serious lessons for you at your individual cooperatives. Now, the very important question that was asked a while ago, and there's nothing to be defensive about, I mean, those are logical questions. While we have seen the sort of advancement we have made in the credit union through the whole question of ensuring that there's a certain amount of consolidation among credit unions, we also need to ensure that the policy and the gap analysis that's being done, whether we are ready to make the straight alignment in terms of the different business needs within the cooperative industry that can be so aligned in terms of the synergies and the sort of reasonable undertakings that they into, and whether we could see a certain amount of acquisition, I don't want to say acquisition, but a certain amount of consolidation in these areas. Because this is very important, because remember what we're seeking to do is, as we said, whether it's from the labor aspect of things, it's all a question of the economies of scale. So sometimes some of the entities can't make it alone, because remember, to go into business, you have to be able to influence something. You have to have a strength, either to dictate the price that you want for your product, or to dictate some of the prices that you want to pay for your input. So those are times that we need to look very seriously, and I am afraid Colin, as much as you all have done an impeccable job, but I always maintain the only reward for good work is more work. So you have enlightened us, you have opened up a thing that obviously we should have seen, and now is the time for us to look at that. The other thing as well, don't fault yourself here, nor should we fault ourselves. Being that we have gone through this serious quantum leap in the movement of the cooperative and some of the other industries, we would have missed a few things. So that's why gap analysis is so important, to see where we need to rethink the whole thing. One of the things that we must do is how we manage information. Should we really have any sort of cooperative entities right now without having IT services or information technology and ways of that means? Because it's through having very complete, accurate information, you can have very rightful decisions being made. So that is the thing that we have to ask ourselves. What are some of the things that we need to do because of the modern era we're going through right now? And we have to understand that the competition, maybe 15, 20 years ago, was internal, meaning that it's just unique to Dominica. Right now, your competition is regional. This is the way we have to start thinking. So it's a time for rethinking. It's a time for really broadening your thought process and using the information there. I'm really elated and very happy to hear some of the feedback. I wasn't surprised by the very first question that was asked. Obviously, those are things that you really wanted. So even from the various entities that we have there, we have to begin to take data collection very seriously. Without the data, you cannot make the informed decision. And I like to tell people a very simple thing. When people talk about accounts is just about a question of process data to give you informed decision. So it's the time for also look at those things as well to ensure that we have the information. We also have to look at strengthening fraternities. How we could have a fraternity that we can feed more effectively from each other. We're not in this thing alone, and as you could rightly understand and appreciate from what is there, if anything happens to the credit union industry or the cooperative industry, it will affect every one of us. And I'm happy that Dr. Henry mentioned it earlier on. I was in Trinidad 7 years before the Clico and Bico bubble burst, and had serious information with a lawyer that was playing taxi man that night in question. That while you have the seemingly rosy side of things, what if such and such had happened? And we know what happened. All the countries within the region had to take a bite of it because we couldn't rely on the financial institutions and industry to have saved us from that what happened. So it's a thing like right now we have to look at it in our own lenses and realize how it affects our various entities and look at it wider. So my take as well going further, because we'll have our break in a while, and maybe later on before we break this afternoon, we can come back to this discussion again where it pertains to the policy. We have seen very excellently the business environment analysis in terms of the SWOT analysis. What we have to ensure that both the business analysis and the strategic status environment analysis has to be done. What I mean by that is looking at the strategic framework and the strategic environment. Basically, to do that, you have to look at the political framework and the political situation in any country. You have to look at the economic. You have to look at the social. You must, in this modern time, you must look at the technological, and of course, the environmental, the legal, are also very, very serious areas that we have to look at. So going forward, we should look and ensure we can see directly all the strategic, environmental framework and focus. How does it inform or updated policy going forward in terms of the political side of things, the economic, the social, the technological, legal, and of course environmental. So those are the other factors that we expect coming out of this discussion. We will see, even before we get the action plan, another we took in, another strengthening, and more consolidation of those ideas. And I really want to say how happy I am with the level of participation and questions. And as Dr. Henry said, the only stupid questions are those not asked. So don't keep the comments, don't keep the questions. And is that a sign somebody else have a question at the back? Okay, so next question for either Dr. Henry or Colin.
One last question.
Yes.
So yeah, I represent Central Credit Union, part of the financial sector. I noticed from all of the findings that we saw in your review and so on, there's one element that is affecting the financial cooperatives. I did not see that in your findings, so I'm not sure if perhaps I did not look up on time. And that is evolving around what my colleague mentioned, which is delinquency. Now, to bring that in together with the reason we are here, which is cooperative strategy. Cooperative to us means the element of generating income, which will eventually contribute to GDP. So in your research, did you come across any ways to assist the cooperative, the financial cooperatives, to deal with a major issue of delinquency that is affecting and threatening all of us? And I say this to bring out an element that was used to help the banking sector that has not been approached for the cooperative financials, and that is of the Eastern Caribbean Asset Management Cooperative that was instituted by the Eastern Caribbean governments when they saw the threat to the banking sector and the threat to the EC dollar. They instituted that institution to assist the commercial banks. And from what I'm hearing in my research, that entity has made headways in alleviating some of the major delinquent loans, especially regarding commercial. The commercial loans that are secured by excellent commercial properties, some of them has been reignited to return back into the economy to generate, and they have tapped into the delinquency rates for the banks. So I've been asking as an advocate for the credit union movement, what can we do in our prep to assist the credit union movement to have an entity such as this to assist our major delinquency loan portfolio, especially as we are coming from what has happened to Dominica with Ross. Ross University left us with major delinquent loans that are covered by houses of great value, but they are non-performing. So if we can find some ways to create suggestions to assist members or borrowers to regenerate these loans, to remove them from the delinquency bracket that they are, to actually put a dent in our delinquency portfolio. What can you tell us in your research and your findings?
No, thanks for that question. That's actually a great jumping point, because during the research, delinquency was not a focus. However, what was a recommendation, if you would say, were bodies that can advocate on behalf of the movement. One such body is an interagency network, and the other is an apex institution. So you have referred to the Eastern Caribbean institution. I can't remember the exact. That body advocating on behalf of commercial banks for issues that arise which impact the commercial banks. However, when it comes to cooperatives, whether they are financial or non-financial, you need one a domestic agency, but as you are also alluding to, an apex body that can focus on these critical issues and address them accordingly. So when you would see the drivers, one of the drivers, or two, one is that interagency body and one is an apex institution, which in addition to promotion also has a responsibility for advocacy. So I really appreciate that point. Delinquency really was not a focus of ours. However, the apex institution was. So the apex body pinpointing, targeting those issues is something that you can drive through the policy. Good? Yes. Before I come to you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Philip Sundaro. To my immediate right is Mrs. Lucille Lawrence. Both of us are from the Essential Oils. We are both of us are board of directors of the Dominica Essential Oils. My question, sir, Mr. Henry. In your deliberation, you made mention of aging members. And so my society has that difficulty. While we try to educate and provide the avenue for the younger generation to be part of the society, we still, in your research, I'm not sure whether you have scouted around that area or to provide some more answers to the society as to how do we approach it? How do we encourage the other younger generation to be part of the society? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, we did actually touch on that, and the agent membership was a particular concern for the non-financial cooperatives, such as yourself. So we did identify a number of areas used to address that. One being in terms of structuring the organization to address those needs. Secondly, in terms of the younger generation, their focus being more on social issues. So those things being able to drive them. And then thirdly, leveraging technological platforms in order to be able to attract them. And yes, so though summarily that's what it is, but yes, we were able to focus on it. And in terms of the policy recommendations coming forward, you would see it driven towards that, because succession planning is a critical part of the policy. Yeah? Mr. DIC. Yes, sir.
Ashil Chris Joseph, Dominica Employers Federation. P.S. Blackmore introduced some very thought-provoking ideas, sort of broadening both the vertical and horizontal parameters that cooperatives should be looking at right now. And I'm wondering, in the policy, probably we should be looking at how do we motivate cooperative societies to move into some non-traditional areas where voluntary investment seem not to be interested, or certain barriers are there that doesn't drive voluntary investment there. But if the investment risk is spread among a certain number of people, as you would typically find in a cooperative, it reduces the risk footprint per person. And there are various areas in our economy right now where we need to drive investment. We have not been successful in getting foreign direct investment. We have not been successful in the traditional one-man or family investment. But if we can tweak the policy in such a way that it makes it attractive to invest in certain areas that we critically need to move this economy, I think we would be doing a good service to the entire Dominican economy, even if it's just in one or two lines in the policies that we are looking at right now. Secondly, we need to take a very serious look at governance in society, in cooperative societies. So cooperative societies have moved a lot. I think the days when you could attend a meeting, an AGM, and you step out as a director, I think we need to really do something about those. You have cooperatives with assets of millions of dollars right now. I think that in itself requires a certain level of quality in your governance structure to be able to add value to the members' investment and the member shares. Specifically, I think we want to tweak our policies to make it unattractive, if not illegal, for someone to be an employee 6 months back then and become a director today of the same enterprise. There are serious intellectual property conflicts there. There are serious issues with the confidentiality of information. And there are issues regarding your personal likes and dislikes of people you once upon a time worked with. Those can have very crippling effect on the success of the society. Bear in mind that no matter what we say and how we dress ourselves, our individuality walks with us wherever we go. And therefore, we need to sort of insulate our cooperative societies from the very insular minds we have when we were an employee and tomorrow we become a director. I just thought that probably these two issues would lend a lot of support, if not in legislation, but in the society as we chase our mission. In the policies as we chase our mission.
Thank you so much for that. Very, very important points. Very important points. Touching on your first point, there are two policy imperatives that reside there. And I know as we go throughout the day, you all will have the opportunity to build those out. One is in terms of incentivizing innovation and growth. And secondly is in terms of driving entrepreneurship into the non-traditional sectors. So those two policy imperatives are built in for further development. But incentivizing innovation and growth is something important. How do you get someone now to volunteer, whether it be time, assets, and get into this cooperative structure? And as I said, minimizing the risk by spreading it across a greater amount of individuals. So of course, how about some kind of tax incentive schemes? So these are things to consider. And if you look at the document, when it is shared, it is built into it as well. So a minimum contribution allowing you to get annual tax breaks, some things like these to be built in to incentivize and drive innovation and growth. In terms of the second point, governance is a critical part. What we are seeing worldwide, and this isn't unique to the Caribbean, is that the cost of poor governance can be crippling to the entire sector and industry. So it is something that was considered, is built in, and as we build out the policy imperatives, you would see the points built in. So as we go throughout the day, you would have the opportunity to contribute to that. Okay, and I see another hand. Yeah. We're going well. Morning.
Phoenix from the Credit Union League. Just a few questions. Well, you said earlier, and I wish to adopt the protocols established earlier. You said when we get to have an opportunity to look at the policy, I take it that it will be circulated for comments prior to being cast in stone.
Definitely, Mr. Wellfield.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Good day, sir.
All right. So a couple of things I wanted to touch on. One, on my brothers from the Kalinago territory. We have an issue whereby because of the legislation regarding land ownership, some of these persons that are in that area, they may want to, for example, use their land or property as collateral, and it cannot be considered because of the regulation there. I think my sister over there mentioned about delinquency. It falls under the same ambit. Is there a contemplation in the policy regarding how financial cooperatives can treat with this issue where there is no collateral can be assigned? So you have persons who, for example, from the territory that might want to secure a mortgage. They have right to the land, but they don't have ownership to it. What treatment can be ascribed there? And also, the folks from the SME sector, services sector. A lot of times, if you, for example, like you're producing goods that can be quantified, it's easy for you to get a loan. But what is somebody who is in the services sector? What parameters or contemplation will there be for the small business owner who are in the services sector? For example, photography, videography, those persons in marketing, where intellectual property is the asset and not something that is physical. How can the sector now under the national policy, provide for guidance for lending to those persons. And as you will know, apart from the agricultural sector, tourism sector is one of the largest contributor to national GDP. So we cannot leave this important sector outside hanging. Is there any contemplation in the policy for increased government collaboration with the financial cooperatives? We have, you're noting the questions, yeah?
Right, yeah, I'm noting the questions. So in terms of the first one, the first point, sorry, Mr. Belford, the first point, just reiterate it again, please.
But that is the one regarding the
Kalinago people,
yes.
Correct. So yes, those heritage and cultural aspects were considered. So also touching on the colleague to your left, his point in terms of securitization, that was the point I was making earlier, that securitization is entering a new realm in terms of becoming more risk-based. So even though you don't have ownership of the asset, you have access to it. So there is considerable value. So when you go to being more risk-based and more managing the risk instead of bringing an entire asset, those things are being considered. The second point was on?
The second point was on the services sector.
Right, yes, so on the services sector. So you would see some contribution going into evolving sectors and those non-traditional sectors. So as you said, even though agriculture is important, you also have tourism. You know, for the weekend, we had the opportunity to build out a strategic plan with Grand Bay Farmers Food Producers Cooperative. So in terms of that, also explore those sectors that agriculture and fishing can also touch on. So that is an important point. And in terms of the SME sector, that was the last point you were touching on. Yes, there is a drive to become more collaborative and integrate other sectors, both through private sector and also through government. And that is alluded to in the policy imperatives in terms of improving services to cooperatives.
Okay, last two.
Yes.
You mentioned about something that is going to be, it has been around for a while, and I think it's going to be introduced at a national level very soon, is that of the Credit Bureau. Yeah. Is that something that is being contemplated for inclusion in the policy that would marry the same idea of securitization and risk analysis for granting of loans and services?
Yes, definitely being considered. Now, it's presented summarily as interagency cooperation, but those institutions are included when we speak to interagency cooperation. Yeah.
Okay, and final two questions, one to the PS, my good friend. Is there a contemplation for increased collaboration with the financial cooperatives and government? We've seen that government social programs have used to a great extent for example, the National Bank and the development banks. But outside perhaps of maybe NEP payments, there has not been a strong tap into the credit union movement by the government. Is there something in the policy that would allow the government to increase collaboration with the movement? We have more than 25 branches and sub-branches spread across the country. So rather than having persons having to come into Roseau to benefit from some of the social services that government may provide from time to time, they can be filtered through the credit union sector. So that's a question for you, PS. And finally to you, my brother, you mentioned about an apex organization, and permit me if it strikes my intellectual curiosity, because the league is the apex organization. I would expect that the policy would also contemplate how do we strengthen the apex organization, because remember, in the cooperatives you have two regulatory bodies. You have the cooperative division, which is for non-financial cooperative, and you have the FSU, which is for financial cooperative, and you have the DCSSL, which is the apex for cooperative. So I would have expected you to allude to how you can strengthen the apex rather than how you can identify it, because legally, as per the 45th AGM, we were ascribed with that role. So I'm a bit tickled on that point. Thank you.
All right, so just the 2 points. Earlier we touched on actually the credit unions being an intermediary through which the government can channel support for the non-financial cooperatives. So that is also built into the policy. Now, concerning the apex body, it's not that it's absent, it's just that we looking at probably formulating it and, as you alluded to, strengthening it to be able to be more all-inclusive and to be a greater advocate for all cooperatives. So, Mr. Belfield fired 6 questions. Thank you all. All right. If no one else, back over to the piece.
Well, not back over to me. He wanted to hear my voice. So, yeah, very solid points, of course. The focus is really seeking to see how we could decentralize services and, of course, improve in a very substantial and tangible way service quality delivery. Of course, as alluded to earlier on by Dr. Henry, it's looking at ways and means we could make the cooperative much more effective. And of course, the credit union being a member agency or entity of the cooperative industry, that will be taken on board. So the point you made is one that is very valid. It's about bringing quality services at the grassroots level, whether it's through the public assistance or the community development initiative. Those are things we can look at. What I will urge you to do as well is also try to strengthen some of the justification for those things. You mentioned the various communities where they are located, so that makes sense for doing. So it's a very, very tangible and a very worthy suggestion made by you. Is it time for taking a break? I think you have done very well so far. And since Dr. Henry, you have allowed him to have an unclassified break, it's only fair that all of us now have a fair break. So we'll take a break for 15 minutes, and then we'll come back again with Dr. Blake and our session before lunch. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of the morning session of the Cooperative Development Division National Cooperative Industry Stakeholder Consultation, which is currently being held at the Goodwill Parish Hall. We have heard from the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Community Development, Mr. Lucien Blackmore, and there was also a presentation by Dr. Andre Vincent Henry, as well as his colleagues, who presented on policies for cooperatives whilst satisfying the demands of the 21st century. We heard the PS urge the stakeholders who are present here today to strengthen their policies. They discussed and asked several questions as to ways in which cooperatives can revise and create policies to strengthen their cooperative framework, and that was just from the morning session. Later on, after the 15-minute break, there will be another presentation where they will speak to how to build a national policy for cooperatives. There will be a question and answer session, as well as a group session and reports given from the various groups who are present here today. There are members from the NCCU, members from the Central Cooperative Credit Union, members from the Youth Development Division, and various other registered cooperatives here on island. But that brings us to the end of our broadcast this morning here at the Goodwill Parish Hall, where the Cooperative Development Division is currently holding their National Cooperative Industry Stakeholder Consultation. We thank you for tuning in to DBS Radio, whether it was via Facebook, YouTube, or via our various frequencies. Thank you so much for choosing the Nation Station. My name is Jema Shemelo, and we're going back to Master Control.